Every time when demons came to Vrindavan, they wanted to kill Krishna. They were very scary and powerful. But Krishna wasn't afraid of them. He defeated demons and protected his devotees. That's why, don't be afraid of anything. Remember Krishna, and he will surely protect you. Was Prabhupada afraid when he was a child? Prabhupada was always under Krishna's protection, and he wasn't afraid of anything. When he was a child, his name was Abhai, meaning fearless. We have a book about Prabhupada. Why are you not asleep? Oh, Mom, please read us the book. It's late. You have to sleep now. Let's read it tomorrow, okay? Good night. Good night, Mommy. I saw it on the shelf. Here it is. Show it to me. Look, there are some photos. Look.
Today, in the streets of many countries, one can see the processions of people wearing colorful Indian clothes. They dance and sing different Indian mantras which glorify Krishna. Until recently, nobody knew about Krishna. God has many names. The name Krishna means the all-attractive. Although God is not Indian, this young all-attractive incarnation of God from India has conquered the hearts of people all over the world today. This credit for this belongs to a pure devotee of God, Krishna, whose name is His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Shrila Prabhupada. On September 1965, Prabhupada came to the USA fulfilling his spiritual master's instructions to set up the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, known as ISKCON. At that time, nobody would have believed that he could do this, as he was 70 years old then, and it was his first trip abroad from India to a foreign country. He went to a country where nobody knew about Krishna. He didn't have any friends who could help him. He had only $7 in his pocket. Nevertheless, upon overcoming a lot of challenges, Prabhupada set up the International Society of Krishna Consciousness in 1 year.
Going to America at the age of 70 without any friends or money in his pocket with the only purpose to preach the teaching about God is possible only for a madman or a saint. Usually older people stay at home and quietly finish their time, and they're almost unnoticed. That's why Prabhupada's arrival to America seemed to be a very crazy action. But the time has shown that it was a greatly heroic act, which no one can repeat.
His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada arrived in America in the middle of the 1960s. America was going through tough times. There was the conflict in Vietnam and there were anti-war protests. The youth hippie movement was gathering momentum. One of its mottos was, "Make love, not war." As it happens, those very discontented young people became the first of Prabhupada's friends and then disciples. Everything what you did for them was precious and mysterious. They compared chanting Indian mantras to taking LSD. Thanks to the association with Srila Prabhupada, many hippies rejected drugs and changed their lives for the better. Srila Prabhupada loved to say that before you were hippies, and now you are happies.
My taking LSD for my spiritual realization, expanded consciousness. I was interested in staying high forever, as it were, maintaining an awareness of the universe that was flowing through me and past me at every second of my life. He says, that's not necessary. He said, your spiritual life is already here. He says, you don't need to take anything for your spiritual life. And I knew he was right. And he had that exalted state of consciousness. I sensed it. And I knew he didn't take anything. And I knew that I wanted this state of consciousness, and that he could teach it to me.
Simple living and high thinking is the main principle of the life which Prabhupada was promoting. In this world, everything is temporal. Why should we waste our short life then? Human life is meant for God realization, love of God. This is what Prabhupada taught his devotees. He gave everyone the opportunity to contact something higher that was previously mysterious. Thanks to that, people have been going through miraculous transformations. At Srila Prabhupada's request, his disciples gave up meat, fish and eggs, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling, and showed spiritual qualities.
So this Krishna Consciousness movement means we are trying to create some first-class man. This is Krishna Consciousness, this movement. So, therefore, we have got these rules and regulations. No illicit sex, no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling. This is the preliminary qualification of a first-class man.
During one of the lectures, Prabhupada was asked, many yogis from India show different tricks and miracles like levitation and so on. What about you? Prabhupada answered, the miracle done by me is in front of you. And he showed at his disciples. Gathering a crowd of frantic fans and onlookers is not much of a miracle. It can be done by politics, musicians, and sports people. And Prabhupada not only gathered the crowds, he also inspired men to become better. If you ever tried someone to get rid of tobacco or alcohol addiction, you know how difficult it is. Yes, if a person changed, you would understand that it is truly a miracle. And that's the real miracle when people let go of their vices. In that way, Prabhupada can be called a magician who lights up the hearts with fire of hope and love. Take your seats. We are going to read. Hurry up! Come here. I'm here. Do you know that Prabhupada didn't come to America by random chance? His whole life he was getting ready for that, and only after many trials he was able to fulfill his dreams. And now we're going to read about it. Prabhupada was born in Calcutta on September 1st, 1896. He was named Abhay Charan. His father's name was Gormahande and mother Rajani. Following the Bengali traditions, his parents invited an astrologist to cast child's horoscope. His parents got excited hearing a very favorable prophecy. The astrologer had predicted that when Abhay turns 70, he will cross the ocean, will open 108 temples, and will become a great religious preacher. Abhay's father was a successful fabric merchant. A part of his profit he donated to the temple where Lord Krishna was worshipped. This temple was in front of their house. Prabhupada grew up in the atmosphere of the love for God. His father was Krishna's devotee and had been dreaming of Abhay being a Vaishnava and preaching the teaching of Bhagavad Gita.
Srila Prabhupada was born in a Vaishnava family who were pure devotees of Lord Krishna. Right from the childhood, he grew up in the atmosphere of serving Krishna. This philosophy is more than 5,000 years old. It is based on Vedic scriptures. There are millions of temples in India where people have been worshiping Krishna for thousands of years. Traditionally, the knowledge is passed along the parampara, which is succession from a spiritual master to a disciple. Prabhupada belonged to one of these branches, which is called Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in this parampara 500 years ago. He initiated the congregational chanting of the holy names of God, Hare Krishna. Lord Chaitanya, using the Vedic scriptures, proved that collective chanting of Hare Krishna, Maha Mantra, is the most effective means to reach the main goal of life, love of God. Later, Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, spread this teaching all over India, and Srila Prabhupada opened this knowledge to the whole world.
You founded the Hare Krishna movement some 7 years ago in 1967, did you not?
Yes.
In a capsule, what is the movement?
The movement is to awaken God consciousness of the human being. The human being is distinguished from the animals, that the animals cannot understand what is God.
Mm-hmm.
And if the human being also does not understand what is God, then he is animal.
I see. And so your movement is to bring about an understanding of God among human beings.
Yes.
You say that Hare Krishna consciousness pretty much takes the absolute truths from the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and the Vedic.
Yeah, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Religion means to understand God.
I understand, but do you feel that in getting truths from various places like the Bible and the Quran and so forth, don't you run into conflicts at all or contradictions in those particular philosophies?
No, I don't find any conflict because the ultimate goal is God. So you have to understand God and try to love Him. So you can go through any religious process. If the goal is attained, that you understand what is God and you try to love Him, then your life is perfect.
Vedic knowledge has deep roots which have been carried through India for thousands of years. Naturally, this Vedic culture seems strange and exotic to modern-day people. Srila Prabhupada's teachings are unique because he was able to adapt this ancient knowledge for people from the West without changing the original meaning. This philosophy previously was unknown and only known to a few people, and only a few people followed it, but thanks to Srila Prabhupada, now people all over the world are now becoming devotees of Lord Krishna.
When I first met the first Hare Krishnas, I can remember how surprised I was, and really I wondered what this meant. The costumes and the chanting and the shaved heads appeared a little strange, a little bizarre to me. But the more I came to know the movement, I came to find that there was a striking similarity in the essence of what they were teaching and saying, and in my understanding of the original core of Christianity. That is, living simply, not trying to accumulate worldly goods or profit, living with compassion toward all creatures, sharing, loving, and living joyfully. I am impressed with how much the teaching of one man in the spiritual tradition that he brought has impacted itself into the lives of so many people.
The spiritual movement organized by Prabhupada is a bona fide spiritual practice, but unfortunately some people think that the Society of Krishna Consciousness is a sect. They think so because they don't know the teachings or just misunderstand because of negative media coverage. Nevertheless, many scientists all over the world highly value Srila Prabhupada's work, and Indians themselves, being in different countries all over the world, are grateful for the opportunity to feel the reconnection to their Indian culture.
Thanks to Prabhupada's mission and the temples he opened, the Indian community feels comfortable all over the world. His teachings and his Indian followers help preserve Indian traditions and culture far away from home, as well as in India.
After his success in spreading Krishna consciousness in America, Srila Prabhupada was met in India as a true hero. The mayor of Delhi himself and other officials paid their respects to him. This is one more proof of the genuineness of Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON movement.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.
No other Indian philosopher, yogi, or preacher have achieved such an enormous success in the Western world as Prabhupada. He always expanded his preaching and dreamed to come to Russia.
Not everyone knows Hinduism has ancient origin in the history of Russia. Jin Katzer, researcher of India and Russian Hinduism, said that people in Russia used to worship Lord Krishna and other Indian deities just a couple of centuries ago. Engravings painted by the Russian painter Emilian Kornevev in the Austrian in 1809 testifies to this. A traditional Hindu ritual of worshiping God is painted on the engraving. Today, such rituals can be seen in temples of Lord Krishna. The true origin of this subject is corroborated by similar sketches painted by Gisler at the end of the 18th century. Peter Simon Pullis describes the appearance of deities that stood on the altar and the ceremony of worshiping them. We can note that the worship to Lord Krishna in Russia started at the end of 1649, when a Hindu colony was founded in Astrakhan. By the decree of Catherine the Great, Bhagavad Gita, the main scripture of the Krishna devotees, was translated and published in 1788. Holy Synod recognized Bhagavad Gita as useful to the soul, a book blessed, and its publication. And later, Tsar Nicholas II also recognized it. Being a prince, he went on a round-the-world journey and spent almost 2 years in India, where he visited all the holy places. He was in Vrindavan, where Krishna appeared and grew up. Nicholas was impressed greatly by India and its spirituality. Thus, on January 28th, in 1891, he wrote in his diary that he had visited a number of temples devoted to the god Krishna. I must confess that I have had a nice impression on me. This feeling is very similar to the feeling when I enter our churches. Entering the temple, I cannot help entering in a religious mood as if I were visiting a Christian church.
Many Russian philosophers, writers, and artists turned to the treasury of Indian philosophy in the search for the meaning of life. For example, Leo Tolstoy, who studied Bhagavad Gita and was a proponent of a vegetarian way of life, said, "How can we hope for peace and prosperity on earth if our own bodies are the living graves for killed animals?" Mom, tell us a story when Prabhupada almost died when he was a child. But you know it already. Doesn't matter. Tell us again. Yes, Mom, tell us again. All right. Once, little Abhai played out in the rain and fell seriously ill. When the doctor examined him, he came up with a terrible diagnosis. At that time, people died because of typhus. Having heard this diagnosis, his parents were terrified. Seeing parents' grief, doctors said that there was a remedy that could help to cure typhus. All parents are ready to do anything to help save their child. Doctor said it was chicken broth. Having heard this, Abhai's father refused flatly. He was a Vaishnav. Krishna devotees don't kill or eat animals. But his wife was persuading him to try this remedy and save Abhai. Because of the strong love for his wife and for his son, he agreed. When the chicken broth was brought, Abhai refused to eat it. They tried to make him eat, but they could not. Watching this, the father couldn't bear it and took Abhai away. He had put him on Krishna's altar and with his wife they started to pray sincerely. By Lord's grace, Abhay recovered. Nobody believed it was possible, and everyone was surprised by this miracle.
Srila Prabhupada dreamed of coming to Russia, but it was difficult to arrange. The Soviet Union was intact at that time, and the whole country was under the Iron Curtain. The world was divided in two camps, and nuclear war could have begun at any moment. The struggle for the world supremacy was going on between the USA and the USSR, between capitalism and communism. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada said an interesting thing. There is no capitalism or communism. There is greed and envy. Greed is caused by capitalism, and envy caused by communism.
Moscow and the Soviet Union were the ideological center where materialism teachings were realized in the social system and the Soviet way of life. Materialistic values were implanted in people's consciousness from the early childhood, such as absence of God, absence of soul, that everything appeared by random chance, that man evolved from the apes, and so on.
In the Soviet Union, communist leaders and communism replaced God and religion. Their monuments and busts were installed everywhere. Streets and cities were named in their honor. People worshiped them and glorified them as God. At the same time, anyone who spoke of God was considered crazy and was treated at the mental hospital and isolated from Soviet society. The world knew about it, and yet Prabhupada wanted to get into the Soviet Union.
So when Prabhupada would say, I want to go to Russia, no one could believe it. No one could even imagine that he would want to go to Russia. Why go to Russia? And even if why, okay, we understand you want to go to, what can you do there? There's nothing you can do. It's totally run by the police. So over and over he would say, I want to go to Russia.
But to get into the Soviet Union was not easy. Prabhupada could not get a visa for a long time. Then his disciples established a correspondence with Orientalist and Indologist Professor Kotovsky. This scholar was the son of the legendary hero of the Red Army, Grigory Kotovsky. Historians say that the funeral arrangement for the divisional commander Kotovsky, by splendor and pomp, was equal to Lenin's funeral. The authority of Kotovsky's son was also high and steadfast. Thanks to this correspondence, Srila Prabhupada got his visa and went to Moscow to meet Professor Kotovsky. It was in June of 1971.
Раздался звонок от сотрудника индийского посольства в Москве.
I get a call from an officer from the Indian embassy who said that Bhaktivedanta Swami, the leader of Hare Krishna movement, came to Moscow in order to meet specifically with you. And if his only purpose was to meet me, it would be impolite to refuse him. That's why I agreed. I did it out of a sense of politeness, not even curiosity.
This meeting was of a personal nature, and each side held their own opinion. Kotovsky defended the official position of the Soviet ideology, and Srila Prabhupada was talking about the advantages of the Vedic society structure. He wanted to propose to the Soviet leadership the Vedic system of governance. Kotovsky did not share the Vedic opinionism of Srila Prabhupada. Actually, Prabhupada's teachings are the same as communism, just spiritual. If the communists say everything belongs to the people, Vaishnavas say that everything belongs to God. One common idea, we do not own anything.
And Australia. The Englishman came here. But is that the property of the English? It was there. America, it was there. And when everything will be finished, it will be there. In the middle we come and claim, it is my property and fight. Isavasanidam sarvam. Everything belongs to God. That's his plan.
Prabhupada did not divide people by race or national origin. He said that everyone is equal before God. He had a very warm attitude towards the Soviet people. The only thing they lack is the love of God, said Srila Prabhupada. One time, watching a military parade, he predicted the future of the Soviet Union.
And he watched this for a long time. And then he turned around to me with tears running down his eyes, and he said, You cannot rule a country by fear. You cannot rule a country by fear, he said. Within 20 years, all of this will be gone. That was 1971. By 1991, it was gone.
At that time, no one could predict the future collapse of Soviet ideology. The regime seemed to be eternal and unshakable. A gigantic ideological machine was working and ingraining the ideas into the whole society. Yet, Prabhupada's predictions became true. Like a regular tourist being in Moscow, he walked the gray and boring streets. He had had only a few days to start this movement in the USSR. But as time was passing and hopes were dwindling, it seemed near impossible to implement what Krishna planned.
Prabhupada faced many more challenges in Moscow than he did in USA, as any preaching activity was prohibited in Russia. He couldn't have any official meetings, nor public lectures. He was dreaming to meet at least one person interested in his message and pass it to him. And this finally happened.
Anatoly Penyev, a young Soviet student, by the hand of fate became the first Soviet disciple of Srila Prabhupada. For 3 days, Prabhupada was revealing to him the philosophical aspects of Krishna Consciousness. Anatoly was impressed with the knowledge and soaked up all the details like a sponge. After 3 days, he decided to devote himself to spreading this knowledge in the USSR.
It was obvious that Krishna organized that meeting. It is impossible to imagine a better candidate than Anatoly Penyev to continue the mission of Srila Prabhupada.
Anatoly belonged to the intellectual dissident youth. He had an inner protest towards the communist regime. After meeting with Srila Prabhupada, he decided to challenge the regime. Not many had dared at that time. For this challenge, he will have to pay a high price.
Treatments in hospitals for years, other kinds of jails. He was pursued everywhere by KGB for years and years. He did this alone practically. He almost acted alone for years before other devotees came to help him. So if there's any one person who is the greatest hero of all to me, it's Anatoly.
There is a festival of chariots that takes place in many cities in India. It is called Rath Yatra. I know this holiday. There is Lord Jagannath on the chariot. Yeah, and everyone pulls the chariot with ropes. That's right. When Prabhupada was a little boy, he held such holidays himself. Together with his father, they made a chariot. And then Abhay persuaded his neighbors, and they cooked sweets for Lord Jagannath. When everything was ready, Rath Yatra was held for 8 days. The whole family, neighbors and children took part in it. They sang and played musical instruments. Since the early childhood, Abhay watched his father worshipping deities, and he was wondering, when will I be able to worship Krishna? And one day, his dream came true. Abhay was about 6 years old when his father gave him little deities of Radha and Krishna. Since then, Abhay served them. He has been offering sweets, ghee lamp, and flowers to those deities.
In the late 60s, Prabhupada held great Rath Yatra festivals around the world and established the deities of Radha and Krishna in ISKCON temples. He said that all he knew he had learned from his father. From the mother he learned many culinary secrets. Srila Prabhupada showed that vegetarian dishes can be tasty and healthy. In general, Srila Prabhupada taught his disciples things he had learned from his parents. Only the importance of publication and distribution of spiritual literature he had learned from his spiritual master.
Anatoly was realizing the challenge of acting alone. He was inexperienced in this philosophy and he needed to establish a relationship with the Western Vaishnavas. That's why he asked Prabhupada to find him a wife from the West who could visit him and help him.
Srila Prabhupada then agreed to fulfill Anatoly's request. The only thing that remained was finding a brave girl who was not just going to go to the Soviet Union, which was already a crazy thing for a Western person, but whom would also marry a Soviet man and transport spiritual literature across the border. With this request, Prabhupada turned to one of his female disciples.
My prayers to agree if Srila Prabhupada would ask a difficult task. And then immediately, very quickly, I told him with a big smile, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And his smile became oceanic. And he turned to Shyama Sundar and he says, okay, you'll arrange. And that's how everything started for me with this great Russian adventure.
One brave French girl fulfilled Prabhupada's desire. She came to Soviet Union and married Anatoly. Then she made several trips to Moscow and brought him Prabhupada's books and taught spiritual practices with him. Another disciple of Srila Prabhupada, Hansaduta Das, used to come to help Anatoly in Moscow. He lived at Anatoly's place and helped him to learn the practices of Krishna Consciousness. When Anatoly's faith and knowledge became stronger, he began to preach on his own. He thus began preaching open talks about God in the Soviet Union. This was dangerous. Therefore, Anatoly visited different groups of people who were talking about yoga, magic, and religion. There, he talked about the philosophy of Krishna Consciousness, and once at a faithful Baptist group, Anatoly met another interested person.
Among the Baptists, I saw a very interesting man who was very different from the crowd. He was emanating such a wonderful energy of tranquility. And after the lecture finished, I approached him, and it was the first time I learned about the Krishna Consciousness. I was so much impressed by it and immediately understood that's what I've been looking for.
In Bolovitsky Lane, opposite to the Baptist Church, was the Laboratory of Bioenergetics. It explored the human biofield as well as telekinesis and telepathy. The laboratory conducted various experiments, one of which was dealing with stress. Anatoly proposed inclusion of the Hare Krishna mantra into this experiment. The experiment consisted of different groups of people loudly repeating different tasks. The first group repeated verses of Pushkin, the second group recited Christian prayers, and the third one chanted the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. The bioenergy rhymes were checked, as well as pulse and blood pressure readings. The results of chanting the Hare Mantra were the best.
The first question people asked after a couple of weeks chanting the mantra: what should we do? We don't want to eat meat anymore. We feel uncomfortable among our friends and relatives. That's very bad. May we stop chanting the mantra? Someone lost desire to smoke, and such were the effects that people witnessed.
In the same laboratory, Anatoly met the famous Soviet musician Stas Namin.
Мы желаем счастья вам, счастья в этом мире большом, как солнце по утрам, пусть оно заходит в дом.
Stas Namin, one of the pioneers of Soviet rock, heard about Hare Krishna movement in the West. His favorite band, the Beatles, sang Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and supported the movement. Due to their influence, Krishna consciousness was becoming more popular.
During this same time period in ISKCON, the Beatles' spiritual leader was George Harrison. He was the first to become acquainted with the teachings of Krishna consciousness and was an active supporter through his whole life. In 1973, Harrison presented ISKCON with his manor outside of London, which is now the Krishna Temple, Bhaktivedanta Manor. He also sponsored the publication of Krishna Book and wrote the music for a famous prayer which is performed in all the temples of the International Societies for Krishna Consciousness. Upon hearing from Antonelli, the philosophy of Krishna Consciousness, Stas was very impressed. All night long he talked about the teachings of Krishna to his band member Vladimir Sakharov. After a while in Canada, Vladimir, who would take initiation from Prabhupada, would become the second Soviet disciple. By the mid-70s, teachings of Krishna consciousness began to spread all over the former Soviet Union.
First was Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Baltics. Then Kiev and Minsk and other cities joined. This movement was spreading like a revolution. It was a spiritual revolution, without guns and shooting, the intellectual revolution.
Unlike Lenin, who said there is no revolution without blood, Srila Prabhupada said the opposite. Major changes must occur in the heart. He called for the principle of ahimsa, or nonviolence. His disciples and followers do not kill insects, not to mention animals or humans.
These Hare Krishna chanters, they never agree to kill any animal, even a plant, because they know everything is part and parcel of God. Why unnecessarily one should be killed? And if you love Krishna, then you love him, the small ant. He'll not interested even to kill even an ant. That is real love.
Do you believe that Christ said that Krishna was his father?
The name may be different. It's like in our country we say this flower something, we say something from. But subject matter must be the same. But God is one. What can I do?
While Abhay was still in college, his father arranged for him to get married with the daughter of another merchant. And the young ones first lived separately in the houses of their parents, as Abhay had to finish college. During the fourth year, Abhay got involved in the national movement for independence, led by Mahatma Gandhi. When English soldiers shot hundreds of unarmed Indians, Gandhi called compatriots for civil disobedience. Responding to Gandhi's call, Abhay rejected his diploma from the Scottish College. Soon after that, Abhay met his spiritual guru for the first time. "You're educated young man. You must preach Krishna consciousness around the world," said the guru. Abhay tried to object that first they needed independence, but the guru replied that Krishna consciousness does not depend on political situation. Everyone needs it now. His spiritual master conviction amazed Abhay, and later he got the initiation. One of the most important meetings with his spiritual guru was on Radha Kund. There, the guru told Abhay, if you ever get money, bring books. And this instruction changed Abhay's life. If you ever get money, print books. This instruction was given to Prabhupada by his guru, and he made it his life goal. Overcoming all the difficulties, Prabhupada has been fulfilling his guru's wish till the very last moment of his life.
Without question, the most important thing that Srila Prabhupada left us are his books. Now his works are translated into more than 80 languages. He founded the publishing house, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which is the largest book publisher printing books on Indian philosophy and religion. Scientists from around the world appreciate Srila Prabhupada's books for their authority, depth, and clarity. They serve as textbooks in many colleges and universities. Today, the popularity of these books have grown.
The peculiarity of Prabhupada books are in his commentaries. He realized the true state of all human beings and the society as a whole in this world. Vedic scriptures are very difficult to understand. Yet, Prabhupada managed to deliver this knowledge in a way people can understand and follow it.
Huge quantities of Srila Prabhupada's books got into the Soviet Union in 1976. This happened due to the Lenin Library and its program of international book exchange. They offered to exchange their communist books for the ones of various publishers all over the world. This proposal was received by Prabhupada's publishing house, and Gopal Krishna Maharaj, director of publishing, sent Prabhupada's books to many libraries in the Soviet Union. It was the first step of the Soviet regime towards Krishna consciousness. The second step was in a year when Prabhupada's publishing house was invited to participate in the first international book fair in Moscow. The event was meant to show that the Soviet Union is open and an intellectual country.
We aimed at representing as many as possible of capitalist and socialist publishing houses. Everything was portrayed like Moscow was becoming the center where people like reading.
In the Soviet Union, people really enjoyed reading any books. Therefore, participation of Prabhupada books in the book fair was an important step in the development of Krishna consciousness in the USSR. New followers joined the movement, and many Soviet people discovered this teaching of Krishna consciousness.
At the exhibit, there were more than 1,000 different sections and divisions, maybe even 2,000. And by some random chance, we came across the section with beautifully published volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam.
At that time, the authorities did not see anything bad in Srila Prabhupada's teachings. Perhaps they thought the Soviet people would not be interested in this religious doctrine. The thorough sharp eye of the KGB had always monitored the development of the Society of Krishna, but it had not interfered yet. November 14th, 1977 was a sad day for the whole International Society for Krishna Consciousness. On this day, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada left this world. After Srila Prabhupada left this planet, Harikesh Swami, a Prabhupada disciple, became responsible for preaching in Eastern Europe. As a young guru, he showed unprecedented enthusiasm and courage in preaching in the USSR. He traveled to the Soviet Union and gave the initiations to the new disciples, and also participated in the Second Moscow Book Fair.
1979 became a year of active development of the Society for Krishna Consciousness in the Soviet Union. Many intelligent people were attracted by it. Among them were students, musicians, artists, and writers.
In the Soviet Union, devotees of Krishna conducted spiritual programs at their homes. For all who wanted to come, the doors were open. So many people were coming. So many of them simply they could not fit into the homes. As it was new, unusual knowledge, the interest in it was huge.
There was nothing else. We were the only ones on the horizon. There was a choice to be there in a swamp or here in the beacon of light. They didn't even realize where they were going. There was something new, something was given, and we needed to be there.
The great interest of people to the teachings of Krishna was caused by the fact that the ideology of communism had lost its edge. Intelligent people wanted something new. They understood that the old way of life is not possible, but they did not know how to get out in a new way.
I graduated from the university and was admitted to postgrad, but I had no idea what I was living for and what was the meaning of it all. I realized some of my capabilities and possibilities, yet all those new perspectives were absolutely dissatisfactory for me. Why? What for? Even if I achieve success here or there, why do I need it anyways? What's the purpose of it all?
Thus, in the late 70s and early 80s, very few people still believed in the bright future of communism in Russia. There was a crisis in all areas of life. Economics, medicine, and education. All were degrading.
It was the time of stagnation, as we call it now. Everyone is applauding to the decrees of the Soviet Congress. Yet, intellectuals, the youth and the students, showed great interest in spiritual knowledge.
There was no formal prohibition, and devotees of Krishna were safely conducting spiritual programs in different clubs and institutions. Anatoly Padyev had been representing the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes he talked for many hours, and everybody would listen with great interest.
He was far from being an outstanding speaker, nor received loud applause. But his speech was always deep and thought out. Every word was as good as gold.
At that time in Russia, for some reason, government authorities did not stop the active development of the Hare Krishna movement. Perhaps this was due to the preparation for the 1980s Olympics. And the authorities just did not see a surge of interest in new religions. During the Olympics, the Soviet Union was going to open the doors for the first time to the whole world. The government wanted to present the Soviet way of life in the best possible way.
It was a very interesting year, even from the astrological perspective. There was some spark of enthusiasm in Moscow. As we got acquainted with Krishna consciousness, many people got introduced to the Vedas and the Vedic knowledge.
Now, many cities had groups of followers of Krishna consciousness. The wise philosophy of India helped them answer many questions about life. They came into contact with something new, yet ancient, something mysterious, and at the same time very simple and clear.
By nature's way, we are getting body, but that is on the selection of the nature according to my work. If I work like animal, I get animal body. If I work as demigod, I get demigod body. If I act as trees, then you get tree body. He reacted like dog, in the dog's body, nature's way. Therefore, a sober man should think, why should I change my body? Why this trouble I shall take? That is human sense. If I am eternal, why not my eternal body? Eternal existence, why shall I die? This is human sense. Unless one comes to this understanding, he is animal. Because animal, by nature's law, is going on. He does not know.
There was Second World War happening. Those were very difficult times for India. And at that difficult time, Prabhupada wrote and published his first magazine called Back to Godhead. He wanted people who were exhausted from war to look at the things through the prism of holy scriptures. In 1947, India was freed from English occupation. Abhay still continued supporting his wife and children, while he lived far away from them, traveling, selling the medicine, and preaching. In Jhansi, he organized a spiritual movement called League of Devotees. Soon he had to return to Calcutta as his enterprise was robbed. In Calcutta, Abhay continued on preaching. He gathered with friends and some followers at his house, and they talked about Krishna. His wife and family did not approve of these meetings or the teachings. There was a conflict within the family, as spiritual lives were threatened. Abhay once came back and couldn't find Srimad Bhagavatam book. His wife confessed to having exchanged it for biscuits. Abhay was shocked. It was the last drop. He left his family and dedicated his life to learning and writing spiritual literature. He was 54 at that time. Olympics were the culmination of the whole ideological performance called the Communist Happiness. It was such a bright event that people still think of it with nostalgia.
At the closing ceremonies of the Olympics of 1980, its mascot, the Olympic bear, flew into the sky. Many Soviet people could not hold back tears. They were saying goodbye to him, but did not realize that they were also saying goodbye to any hope of a brighter future. Many dissident groups in different societies that did not agree with the government emerged during the Olympic time in the Soviet Union. Any free thinking that was not associated with the ideology of communism was seen as an ideological act of sabotage from the West. The Society for Krishna Consciousness was also put on that list of organizations. The KGB began an active ideological purge. In the fall of 1980, the chairman of the KGB, Antropov, speaking to the Communist Central Committee, said, "The International Society for Krishna Consciousness seeks leading their followers from participation in social, political work towards mysticism by denying the communist ideology and the socialist state." Later, the Communist magazine published a large article by KGB Chief Deputy Tiskin. This article was dedicated to Western ideological subversion. Tiskin pictured the Hare Krishna movement as a hostile organization. The KGB created a special group called Search to deal with new religious movements.
Starting with this moment, the quiet life of Krishna devotees had finished. New period had come and brought them persecution, searches, and arrests.
The first intervention of the authorities was in Riga. There, Russian devotees staged a program right in the house of the pioneers. Authorities stopped the program and arrested everyone present, and the spiritual master Harikesh Swami was deported from the Soviet Union. Similarly, programs were interrupted in apartments all over Moscow.
Both rooms were packed with people. I was in one of the rooms and Vidura was in another. Suddenly, the doors got burst open and several men in civilian clothes came in together with a policeman. They commanded everyone to stay put. What is the gathering? Show your documents.
Similar raids began to happen at all the apartments where Krishna believers were gathering. They were detained and letters were sent to the heads of companies where they worked. These letters demanded to conduct educational work and awaken socialist consciousness in them.
I was working at the Institute of Scientific Atheism of the Academy of Social Sciences under the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party. I was working there from 1976 to 1991. At the beginning of the 80s, I became the executive secretary of the news bulletin issued by the Institute. This bulletin was sent regularly to the Communist Party committee, starting from the district committees up to USSR Republic central committees.
The main task of this bulletin was forming a single political opinion in the Soviet Union. The very first issue of this bulletin already had negative information about the Society for Krishna Consciousness.
I believe that these materials were based on information prepared by the KGB group Surge. Their goal was to let political party associations to be hostile to our movement, and in their turn, this attitude would be extended towards the Society for Krishna Consciousness and towards the teachings of Shrila Prabhupada.
The work carried out by the Communist Party committee was relentless and harsh. Many people who were interested in the teachings of Krishna were afraid and stopped coming to the meetings of the devotees.
One acquaintance told me, I became aware at a district Komsomol committee meeting that Society for Krishna Consciousness is considered destructive and that we need to be careful and fight with it.
The KGB wanted to control and know everything that happened in the Hare Krishna movement. They were intimidating and recruiting informers, spies, within the Russian Hare Krishna movement.
Once upon a time, a KGB officer came up to me at work. I was invited to the provost of the university, and where three of us had a conversation, after which I was offered a choice: Krishna consciousness or collaboration with the KGB.
Such a choice was offered to all those who attended the programs for Krishna consciousness. To refuse to cooperate with the KGB meant to put an end to their future. The KGB used administrative resources. People who refused to be informers were fired, expelled from institutes and universities.
Everybody knew that KGB would come sooner or later. Everybody preserved secrecy. No talks over the phone, only with encoded phrases. Everybody was suspecting each other, trying to figure out who was a KGB agent in our community and who was not.
In spite of pressure from the KGB, brave devotees continued to meet and develop their interest in the teachings of Krishna. They just did not do it so openly as before. Meetings were not advertised and took place among acquaintances.
It's amazing, but we still managed to gather in groups of 10, 20, 30. We sang loudly and conducted programs. And in other words, we behaved strangely. These programs had a special flavor to them.
There is a famous proverb, "Forbidden fruit is sweet." In this case, the saying was right. Despite the threats, the devotees of Krishna continued to go along their way of preaching. The main claims of the authorities was that the society was not registered. Then Krishna devotees decided to register. This was in 1981. They filled out all the applications and made a list of all the devotees. These papers were submitted to the authorized representative of religious affairs, and after a while, devotees came back for an answer.
We were told very harshly that there was no way we could register our society, as our rules of our religion were very hostile to the socialist ideology and socialist regime. His arguments were that the Society for Krishna Consciousness was financed by the CIA and its goal was destroying the Soviet society and the Soviet regime.
To set up the Soviet people against a person or any society, it was enough to say they work for the CIA. It was impossible to check, but hostility was guaranteed. In the Soviet Union, enemies of the state was disliked.
Much time was spent by the KGB on studying and terminating the activity of the Society for Krishna Consciousness. Yet, they did not find any evidence of the Society's relation neither to foreign intelligence agencies, nor CIA, nor the politics. As a matter of fact, it was, and it still is, a spiritual practice and a religious organization. It didn't have anything in common with the politics or intelligence service, and I don't think it ever will.
The ideological machine in the Soviet Union worked perfectly. Public opinion was formed in a short time. Soviet newspapers criticized the Krishna Society and its teachings. They wrote about Harikesh Swami. It appears Mr. Kopanella is a longtime CIA agent specializing in ideological subversion. Other newspapers had written about Srila Prabhupada, saying Srila Prabhupada was a direct and honest man when it comes to his political views and ideological preferences. We have to fundamentally change the atheistic, communistic tendencies of rascals and philosophers, said Srila Prabhupada. Even Goebbels would have envied his style.
The Soviet Union authorities wanted to get rid of the Krishna consciousness without much pain. After threats, job and educational displacement that did not work, the authorities started criminal investigation measures.
In the Soviet Union, the search for Krishna devotees was possible only at the opening of a criminal case. The searches began at the same time in all cities in the apartments of Krishna followers. Everyone was checked, from experienced devotees to beginners.
During the first search, I asked, "You did the searches at Premavati's, Vishwamitra's, and Vidura's homes. Why do you need to search my place? I'm a novice. I'm just curious about this. You're interested in it, and now someone is interested in you. And you will get this." And that's what he showed me. It was clear at that time that the repression was gathering pace. That time, we didn't know about the reporting notices, yet we felt the peculiar attitude towards us. How we felt the authorities were behaving at the interrogations.
In 1982, there was the first trial over the followers of Krishna. Vishwamrita Das and Sanatananda Das were judged. Thus, the authorities showed their strength on one hand and weakness on the other, because communist ideology had lost to the teachings of God, Krishna.
The trial was dramatic and went in a non-public regime. Only the closest relatives were allowed to be present at the trial, like mother or father, and nobody else. There was direct pressure on the witnesses. They were forced to testify in a way that it was necessary for the court to acknowledge us guilty.
Before his trial, the followers of Krishna were several times condemned for vagrancy and parasitism. But this time, Vishwamrita and Sanatananda were convicted for religious activities. They got the maximum sentence for encroachment on the personality and the rights of citizens under the guise of performing religious ceremonies.
Authorities hoped that this trial would frighten all other Krishna followers, but it had the opposite effect. The Soviet Vaishnavas became even more active.
At that time, there were none of Srila Prabhupada's books in Russian. Therefore, Premavati organized a group of people to translate the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Different chapters were translated in different cities of the Soviet Union. The KGB knew that the Bhagavad Gita was being translated, and they were trying to stop it.
Vidura Prabhu was using an aphorism relevant to our times. Our fifth principle is conspiration. It was a reference to Lenin. We felt like distributors of Iskra, the revolutionary newspaper of 1917.
This Russian translation of the Bhagavad Gita was completed and sent to Sweden for publication. The followers of Krishna from Armenia were even more active. Not only had they translated Bhagavad Gita, they also illegally printed and sent it to all the cities of the Soviet Union. Brave Armenian devotees began to distribute books right on the street to passerbys. Once they decided to unite, Sarvabhavana, Sachi Sutta were the most eminent devotees. Another devotee, Bharadaraja Das, was also distributing books in many cities.
Three of us, the strongest Sankirtanists in Russia, decided together for a trip across major cities in the USSR. But the meeting didn't happen. Before my flight to Yerevan, they began to persecute us roughly. It happened in Armenia and all over the USSR.
Eventually, mass arrests began all over the cities of the Soviet Union. This time the authorities were very determined. This was stated in a KGB note, which was filled with one criminal case.
The report said that in 1980, KGB and Ministry of Internal Affairs created a group called Search, which would conduct around 15 show-off trials. There were cities mentioned where trials had to be conducted. The goal was to discredit the Society for Krishna Consciousness in the USSR, to select people who would repent completely and to frighten all others. Such a crusade was to take place.
To be imprisoned based on the Criminal Code Article 227, Religious Foundation, it was necessary to prove causing bodily harm to the health of others. But the court did not have such evidence. The main charge was to put the followers of Krishna on trial for preaching about vegetarianism, which also, they say, caused suffering to people. The most dramatic trial was held in Moscow. 6 people were judged, and among them was Premavati. At that time, she had 2 small children, and she was pregnant.
Frankly speaking, I didn't expect that a woman with 2 small children would be imprisoned. But until a certain moment, after some time, I started to expect this.
The charges against the Russian devotees were unbelievable. Judging people for being vegetarian. This could only happen in the Soviet Union. Premavati's lawyer, an elderly woman, fainted several times during her trial.
It was a dramatic situation. She took those moments very close to heart. She fainted in the court, and we thought she could die there. The atmosphere in the hall was very bad. It felt like a farce. The whole court was like a farce, and a comedy, and then a farce. When the victims refused their evidence, they're taken from the court, and the evidence would be read, which the victims refused.
The Soviet government did not receive the expected result. They wanted to see the remorse of Krishna followers, but that didn't happen. Therefore, the verdict was very severe. Similar process took place in many cities over the Soviet Union.
Those proceedings took place mostly behind the closed doors. The falsified examinations and the sentences were decided beforehand. The sentence was written down by the KGB department. That department was called the Search, and it was fighting against new religious doctrines.
Subhadaya, Krishna Messiah, Budre, Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami.
To reach his goals, Prabhupada faced many challenges. Publishing of books did cost him a lot. In 1950s, it was a very difficult time for Abhay. Having left his family, he lived as a wandering preacher without shelter or any support. He didn't have winter clothes, as he was saving money to publish his magazine, Back to Godhead. Prabhupada was asking people for donation to publish magazines and books, and not many have responded, and he had to pay off for printing in parts. And once the owner of printing house asked why he was trying so hard in spite of the difficulties, Prabhupada said, "This is my mission." When the edition was ready, Abhay walked around the city selling the magazines, and the money he collected he used for new edition. When Abhay was living in Vrindavan, his spiritual teacher came to him in the dream and instructed to take sannyasa, the full renunciation and dedication to God. Soon after this dream, Abhay took sannyasa and got a new name, Bhaktivedanta Swami.
For the Soviet devotees, imprisonment was a special test. Many Armenian and Ukrainian devotees were tortured in mental hospitals. With the help of psychotropic drugs, their memories were erased. Guards tortured Sachisucha. Knowing that he is a vegetarian, they offered him only meat, which he refused. Most tragically, it was at this time pregnant Premavati gave birth in prison.
I felt that I was about to give birth. And you won't believe, in our cell, one woman delivered straight into the toilet bowl, just in front of me, as it was impossible to make the guards respond. And I said I didn't want to deliver like that woman.
After the baby girl was born, she was given the name Marika. As the pregnancy was going on in prison, this girl was weak and doctors found heart disease. While still being in prison, the devotees of Krishna continued preaching. They got punished many times because of this, and Vishwamrita was judged in prison one more time by the authorities. They said in the sentence, Krisky serving his sentence for the convicted crime, that he hadn't drawn a due conclusion and perpetrated crimes again.
This time, no one pressured or blackmailed me. The court was very calm, and everybody, including the judge and the prosecutor, understood that the court was merely a performance. They had a formal reason to accuse me for continuing preaching the beliefs that I was previously accused of. I said sincerely that I did not consider myself guilty and believed that teachings of the Vedas and Krishna were beneficial to people, and I actually preached a little bit during my speech in the court.
In the 1980s, all Soviet society was waiting for change. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power and began perestroika. He was talking about freedom of speech and democracy. At that time in the West, one of the disciples of Shrila Prabhupada, Kirtiraj Prabhu, started a campaign drive for the release of the Soviet devotees. All throughout ISKCON, there were meetings and protests going on in different countries. Western mass media was reporting about the Krishna devotees being imprisoned in the Soviet Union. International organizations for human rights watch joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and was appealing to the Soviet government to release the devotees of Krishna in Russia. But in the Soviet Union, they didn't pay any attention to those appeals. There were still newspaper articles being published in Russia with a negative twist, and repressions continued to the devotees. Misinformation about the Russian devotees was common in Russia. There was so much nonsense in the Soviet Union. One of them, newspapers claimed, imprisonment of the children by devotees. Just because of this absurdity, Premavati's daughter was doomed to die.
When she got sick, she was taken quickly to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, she stopped breathing. That was it. That's how it was.
With the death of her devotee daughter, her death shocked the world. Western countries and India protested this tragedy with the Russian devotees. It all happened during the talks about publicity and democracy in Russia. That tragic accident made all the world community to draw attention to the persecution not only of the devotees of Krishna, but of people of all faiths who lived in the Soviet Union. The leaders of different countries appealed to Mikhail Gorbachev with requests to release the Soviet Vaishnavas. The Prime Minister of Australia, Robert Hooke, asked him to do so. Also, Nancy Reagan, the wife of President Reagan, gave him the lists of all the Russian devotees in prison.
Those Soviet devotees who were still free also took part in the protests. Recollecting memories of those times, they said that there were no bad shits because all of them were used for slogans and streamers.
Even during this time, in Perestroika, meetings and protests in the Soviet Union were being broken up. It wasn't allowed to show posters, raise protests, and chant any prayers in public.
The police did not allow devotees to sing. When we started singing, they would interfere. And then something got into me. The people around wanted to sing, and the police was running around and shutting everyone's mouth. I didn't know where it came from. I started singing, and my voice is pretty loud. Everybody was standing silent. And everybody started singing, and the police lost their heads and they didn't know where to run. I like this story so much.
Утро красит нежным светом стены древнего Кремля. Просыпается с рассветом вся советская земля.
Under the influence of the world community to the Soviet government had to retrial the devotees of Krishna. The sentences were repealed because there wasn't corpus delicti. The Russian devotees were then given their freedom. Sachi Sucha, the devotees from Armenia, was expected to come back too. But he was tormented by his jailers, and he was very weak. Just a few days before his freedom,
we were waiting for him. We were prepared to meet him. And when it was time to leave, he sat down, he took the beads, made a paper garland, put it on himself, wrapped himself in a sheet, and started chanting Maha Mantra. He left his body, seated, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He didn't come to visit us. Krishna had such a plan. It was needed for some reason.
Sadly, he did not recover his health and died in prison. Sachi Suta's death shocked all the devotees and well-wishers of ISKCON around the world. Another Armenian devotee, Marika Samakochan, was tormented in a mental hospital. Freedom of religion in the Soviet Union was very hard to obtain. Never before in history were the devotees of Krishna persecuted so hard as they were in the Soviet Union.
I have to say that every religion, which evolved considerably enough, had to come through a period of persecution. And the Society for Krishna Consciousness was not an exception.
Despite having gone through such tragic times of persecution, Krishna Consciousness Society got a stronger hold in Russia. In 1977, when Srila Prabhupada passed away, the world community was going through hard times of disintegration and disagreement. But every cloud has a silver lining. Defending Soviet devotees united the worldwide community of devotees. On the May 20th of 1988, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness was finally registered in Moscow. It was the first new religious organization registered in the Soviet Union. Soviet Vaishnavas have become the first group to go for mass pilgrimage in India's holy places. In 1989, 60 pilgrims of ISKCON set off for India from Russia. Never before such a big group of devotees from the USSR went to holy places. In India, they were met very enthusiastically.
Vaishnavas were honored with prisons and mental hospitals before, but now they are received by the president of the country with population over 1 billion, and the president receives them with honor and respect. That had to be accepted in Russia as a fact as well. Before it was said that Krishna Consciousness was a sect, an ideological act of sabotage from the USA. Now we found out that it was all a lie. They're being received in India at high level as honorable guests.
For the Russian devotees of Lord Krishna, pilgrimage to India became a very important event. It was the first mass religious action of the devotees of Krishna in Russia. Soon the Soviet Union would come apart, but Krishna consciousness would continue developing and expanding in it. New temples would be built. The books by Srila Prabhupada would be published and distributed in Russia. Thanks to Krishna teachings, thousands of Russians will rid themselves of bad habits and change their lives for the better.
We say that you chant Hare Krishna, eat here sumptuously, live here comfortably, and you become peaceful. It is guaranteed. If anyone, even a madman, agrees to this principle, that let him chant Hare Krishna mantra, take whatever nice food stuff we prepare, take, and live peacefully. He will be peaceful.
What's your answer that still such a small percentage of the population, tiny percentage of the population, accept a philosophy that sounds so
tiny percentage, just like there are so many stars in the sky, and there is one moon. In percentage, the moon is nothing. If you take percentage of the stars, the moon is nothing. But moon is important than all the nonsense stars. This is the example.
Once answering a similar question, Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is like a diamond. Not everyone can afford a diamond, but he who possesses it knows its value. Our qualities are like diamonds, and love for God is like fire. This divine fire of love is vital for everybody, and Prabhupada lights up the hearts with it. If you come in touch with his teachings, probably your heart will also be warmed up by this divine fire. After Prabhupada took sannyasa, he lived in Vrindavan, in Radha Damodar temple. There he started to comment and translate Srimad Bhagavatam, which is considered to be the cream of Vedic knowledge. But it wasn't enough just to write the books, they also had to be published, and as before, Prabhupada was looking for money for publishing. Then he would buy paper, proofread, and watch the process of printing, all by himself. Thanks to his persistence, in 2 years he managed to publish 3 huge volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. These books helped Prabhupada to receive acknowledgement among local academic society. But it wasn't enough, as his vision was aiming towards the West. On learning Prabhupada's aspiration, Sir Agarwal agreed to help him in obtaining an American visa. Prabhupada was 69 years old at that time. He had 200 3-volume sets of Srimad Bhagavatam and $7 in cash. He was heading to America on a small cargo ship, to the country where nobody was waiting for him. He was merely fulfilling the desire of his spiritual guru and was convinced that the world needed Krishna's teachings. This is how the new adventures of Prabhupada begin. What happened after that? Mama, please read for us. We will definitely read, but next time. It is late now. It's time to go to sleep.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master told him, if you ever get money one day, publish books. Srila Prabhupada was fulfilling his instruction of his spiritual master throughout his whole life. Even on his deathbed, he continued working on translating his books. I will live forever in my books, said Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada revealed ancient, but at the same time new knowledge, old Vedic culture, religion, and gave a new life to the entire world. His contribution to the modern world will be appreciated only in years to come. Krishna Consciousness is for everyone. Everyone can do it today, regardless of race, creed, or nationality, said Srila Prabhupada.
Bhakti Vedanta